Well, hey everybody, Wes McDonald here, and I want to thank you for joining in on Tigerpaw's live stream broadcast today. I'm super excited. We're covering a topic which is really important for a lot of the businesses on our channel, probably yours if you're watching this, and that is succession planning. That every great business is going to need to move through another generation. And sometimes that happens, and sometimes it moves in a different direction, such as acquisitions. And if you watch the news today, you might be thinking a little bit about that too. So before we get any further, I want to take the time to introduce our exciting panel of guests. They are industry veterans and people that have been through the process and can share with you some of the things that you can expect. So without further ado, you'll get to meet Chelsey Bode from Pearson-Kelly Technology, Untitled Woolfolk of Documation, Preston Woolfolk from the same company, James Loffler from Loffler Companies, and Jim Loffler from Loffler Companies as well. So let's bring in our guests. How are you, Jim?
Doing fantastic. Thanks for having us.
Oh, great. So good to have you here today. And James, nice to see you as well.
Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah. And Chelsey Bode, wonderful to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Wes.
And last but never least, we've got the Preston brothers, and thank you very much for joining in today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. Yeah. So super exciting. And before we go any further, nobody knows you better than yourself. So maybe you can give a brief introduction for our audience. And Jim, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to start off. I'm Jim Loffler. I founded Loffler Companies in 1986, selling dictation machines and typewriters. And that company has evolved now to copying and printing solutions, IT managed services, cybersecurity, outsourced facilities management, and also the real estate business. So we've got about 560 employees. We're based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and cover 6 states surrounding the Midwest.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm always fascinated here about a business that has been around long enough to remember actual physical typewriters. And some of the folks watching today might never have actually seen a real one. So
yeah, no, I realize that for sure.
Wow, look how far we've come. Well, appreciate you being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, and James, maybe you can introduce yourself for our audience.
Yeah, hello, James Loffler. I've been with Loffler Companies since 2006. I've held numerous roles from sales to sales leadership, and I've been in my current role as president for just over 2 years.
Well, congratulations on that, and thank you very much for joining in today.
Thank you.
And Chelsey Bode, if you can introduce yourself for our audience.
Sure. I'm Chelsey, CEO of Pearson-Kelly Technology, and we're based out of Southwest Missouri, but we tip into Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Kansas a bit. And so I like to say I started in 1983 as a baby. My father has been in the industry my entire life, but decided to go into business for himself back in 2004. And so I joined in 2007 as a 6th employee, and we started a partnership about 10 years ago, and I acquired the shares fully a couple of years back. So we've been through the full gamut of transition.
Well, that's great. I appreciate being here today to help others through that, same transition. And Preston and Hunter, if you could introduce yourselves.
So brothers here, co-presidents. I'm known as co-president number 1. This is my baby brother, Preston, and I'm Hunter. We get to have a lot of fun working together. We cover the state of Texas, the entirety, and we've got all sorts of exciting things to share. We've had quite third generation, so a lot with penetration.
Founded in 1990 as Documation here in Texas, but our family's been in the industry since 1958. Our grandfather
Wow.
since the 50s, and our dad since the early 80s. So we've been doing it kind of since the industry was founded. We've been in it pretty much.
And so am I correct in assuming that this is 3rd generation for your company?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
We've already perpetuated to the 3rd generation. So we're looking at the 4th next, right?
Well, that's great. And hey, let's jump right into this, right? And I wonder if you could, and maybe Chelsey, I'll actually get you to start this, right? But if you could describe your current succession plan and the steps that you guys took to actually ensure a smooth transition of power when you went through that.
You bet. So it's a little complicated because I feel like I'm starting all over again because we just tackled the transition to me, and now I'm looking for my next move for our situation today. But going back, when my dad and I first started talking about transition, it was in 2011. And the way that we started was really just some open dialogue with a third party consultant, asking questions and taking us through some independent exercises, and then some exercises together to figure out where we had our strengths and gaps potentially. And then really it was twofold. You have the succession for death. What happens if I die, he dies, or both die, and making sure that we're taking care of our family and the employees. So that was our first phase to making sure that we had buttoned up. And then after that, working through the phase of over lifetime and what that looked like. And really for me, it was to carry out his desires and understand what those are. And then try to figure out if and where I fit in and what that looks like to make it a win for both sides. So that's how we got started. We made it happen 2021. And like I said, now I've got it buttoned up on death, but I'm still kind of in that. I hope I get some good tips today to start going through the whole vetting process again for our lifetime succession moving forward.
Wow, that's great. And so just to clarify a little bit, so you said you're moving through the next step right now, and I'm not sure if I got that correctly. So what does that mean?
What do I want? So how does it right now? I feel like I just got a hold of everything, and then I woke up and I thought, well, now my dad's taken care of, and I need a game plan of how this looks for me, and whether it's one of my two kids or I wake up and they want nothing to do with the business, like my brother and sister, they have nothing to do with the family business. And so just kind of walking through what all those things look like and what paths and direction we go from here.
Yeah, isn't that incredible, right? And obviously, as the news came out today, that Tigerpaw Software is now a Rev.io company, right? And they went through 2 generations, and then the third succession, if you will, was through acquisition, right? So all of those options are obviously always available. And I'm wondering, maybe we'll pass that question over to you, Jim and James. You can decide which one wants to take that. For the succession plan, what kind of steps did you do to ensure the smooth transition between you both?
I'll start off, and James, you just jump in because I know you've got some good input. We started this a long time ago in terms of it started as a dream, really. You have children, and someday you wonder, would they be interested in continuing the business? And but it's very important because you don't know if whoever's taking over, if they're capable of doing the job, if they want to do the job, or do they fit the culture? And so James started working in the business many, many years ago, and it was a conversation that we had. And so it's really been a long time in the planning for us that this was the plan. And so where we're at, we've done some trusts so far. We're planning on doing some additional multi-generational trusts to help future generations deal with some of the problems and the complexity of doing this every generation. And so it's been clear to our employees, it's been clear to our customers, it's been clear to our partners that this has been our plan at Loffler for over 10 years. Wow. So I think the customers and the employees, this is no surprise to them. James has taken many leadership roles in the company over the years. So James, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just say, along the way, communication is one of the critical items that stands out in those steps. I think, it's the little things. So when Jim 5 years ago, someday James will lead the company, or if he's talking with a partner, he's talking with an employee. So when that day actually comes, one of the things you get nervous about as leaders is you want to have minimal disruption for your organization. And so to have that message, being consistent for 5 years leading up to that transition, really aided in it being a very, minimal disruption as we made that transition.
Well, that's great. And it kind of reminds me, there's an analogy and, it's used all the time about the boiling frog, right? If you dump the frog into the pot of boiling water, it jumps out. But if you raise it a degree at a time, it boils before it knows it, right? And I guess that idea that when you have that constant stream of information, all the time, that communication, it's just a natural next step for everyone. They're like, oh yeah,
Right.
yeah. Oh, great. So now is when it actually happens.
Yeah. The other step I would say that we took is that as I stepped into the president role, obviously there was a role to backfill. And so getting in front of that, 3 years in advance to make sure that we had that replacement in place again, making sure we had minimal disruption as that transition was taking place was key as well.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm glad you touched on communication, because we are going to obviously dive into that a little further on as well. Perfect. And Hunter and Preston, maybe you can share with us, what it looked like for you as you moved through this. What kind of things did you have in place to make sure that there was a smooth transition for you?
Yeah, I think, when you look at a third generation transition, we're the ones that fail, right? And so if you look at stats,
that's true. Yeah.
nationwide, right? So I think the stat, I could be wrong on it, but it's 3% of third generation transitions either fail or sell by the 5-year mark. So they're either going backwards from what their grandparents took it to, or they're selling it off to somebody else because it's in the best interest of the employees, right? And so no pressure, right? No pressure at all. And if that's, Chelsey or James's kids, right? No pressure to them, right? They're the ones that we're all worried about. And so I think that, that creates an extra level of complication across the board, because you're also dealing with, more siblings, more cousins, there's just a lot more people in the mix, right? And even if you look at Hunter and I today, across the two of us, we have 6 children, right? So as we're thinking about 4th generation, and potentially, you just get further apart from what you would call the root entrepreneur, right? For us, that was grandpa, right? So he's at the top, and as the families get bigger. And so, that adds extra elements where you're really trying to, what's best for the family, equally as important, what's best for your employees, right?
Right.
And sometimes that's keeping the business, sometimes that's perpetuating the business, and sometimes that's selling the business, right? It really just depends as to what's best for the employees, or if you have any other partners in the business, as a good outcome for everybody. Because obviously, if you have the wrong leadership in place, you can destroy the livelihoods of a lot of employees as well, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned the stats, right? And I think for even a 2nd generation transition, it's about 30% success rate. And then, like you said, for the 3rd generation, did you say 3%? Was the number that small?
I believe it's 3%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was lower than that. I remember 2%, because we had some mentors in the past say, all odds are set against y'all. So good luck.
That's a great way to start, right?
Yeah.
At your opportunity.
Well, that's awesome. I appreciate it. And now we've been talking about, obviously, for, the younger folks, right? You mentioned you have 6 kids to think about now below you, and then cousins everywhere else. And for everyone, I wonder, what made you decide, and obviously not all of the previous owners are here. So what decisions were made on who would be that successor, right? Are there certain qualities and skills that either you were looking for, in your case, Jim, or that, that the previous owners knew that you all had? And maybe I'll start with Chelsey on that one.
Okay, so my dad fortunately did a little video on this topic, so I can kind of speak on his behalf based on his own words used. But he said that seeing the same drive and seeing some of the commonalities that made him love the game of business in me really sparked his eye, and kind of sat back and said, I think Chelsey may have what it takes to take the baton at some point. But then I think bigger than that, it's what is the humility with the clients? What is the humility within our own organization and the people and some of the leadership, and where my heart was, and seeing if that had the same alignment to what made him successful throughout his years was really an attribute that he was very protective of, wanting to make sure that stayed intact. And so fortunately, I hope our employees and clients feel the same way. I think they do. But he wanted to make sure that he was really leaving something that would continue to flourish, and not necessarily change a whole lot. And so those were the things that he looked for, and those are the same things that I look for our leadership team and for the people that are helping us get to that next step.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, like that you don't want to obviously change things too much, right? And Chelsey, I've heard you speak on culture before as well, and Jim, you mentioned it, that this idea that the company becomes a thing unto itself as well, right? Although it's being, sort of managed and taken care of by family, that you've built something that is unto itself, kind of its own thing, right? So, the management and maintenance of that culture obviously sounds, very important. And I wonder, Preston and Hunter, as you're, sharing a position as, co-presidents, right? Are there qualities that the previous ownership was looking for in you both that were different? Like, what are those combined qualities? And this one's interesting to me because I'm an identical twin. We're quite different. We do have some very contrasting, qualities that work together. So I'd be interested to hear, yours.
Does your identical twin look like Wolverine as well?
Yeah, no, he's actually shaved the chops, and as I like to say now at my age, I'm old man Logan. Yeah.
I love it. It's good. Well, we had a bit of a different perpetuation experience. It was not planned, and we did not follow a process. So we would probably be candidates of what not to do. But I would say that a neat experience for us was that we were never brought into the business or requested to be brought in the business. We chose to, so that was pretty neat because it was not a feeling of need or pressure, and we probably would have just rebelled and not gone this route if we were courted. And then as here, we had bosses and we had different divisions we worked for, and we were just another employee, and I was a sales rep. Preston started the IT branch of our company, and he was given little to no direction, and I was a sales rep of good luck, figure it out and make as much money or as little as you'd like, and you're all commission. So it was really good for us that there wasn't much hand holding throughout all that process. And then so I don't know we were chosen by skill sets. We grew into those skill sets, and there's God-given natures. So Preston is quite, the master of all things operations, and we call our integrator. And then I love all the sales and marketing and foo-foo stuff, so I get to be the visionary side. And there's a clear line between the two of us. And as you'll read through books and all, it's really great for us because we have two different skill sets, even though sharing the same title.
Yeah, I love to hear that. And it's just interesting that, like you said, one, the visionary side, and then other, the operational side, and having those, work together. So congratulations on that. And Jim, I'm wondering, what did you see in James? What was the characteristics and the things that you said, yes, this is definitely going to work. Let's do it.
Yeah, it's a hard decision as a parent because you want to make sure that whoever you put in there can succeed. And James's persistence over the years, his commitment to the business, I always liken it to if I was over in Iraq in a foxhole, there'd never be anyone I would trust more than James to have my back.
Right.
And back to you need to leave it to someone that can do the job, but also that wants to do the job, because can do it and want to are two different things.
Isn't that the truth?
It really is. And so, it was clear to me that James was the right person, because running a business like this is not easy, and it can be very stressful.
Yes.
And you have to have a lot of grit and a lot of determination. And there's no doubt in my mind that he was the right person. And he's also my best friend, which doesn't hurt.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. So it sounds like that trust factor, obviously right out of the gate, once you knew that you wanted to do it, was pretty easy. And I think that's, good advice for people, right? That working relationship, when you can say that you're obviously friends as well as business partners, that's got to go a long way to give you some comfort and the success for the next generation.
That doesn't always mean we see things the same.
Well, yeah. Well, you said friends, not clones. So. Oh, that's great. And I wonder, moving on, just wondering if you're currently in the process. Well, actually, I'm going to take this one out because we did find out that we've already moved through that. But conflict, right? So, and it's funny, Jim, that you just mentioned that, right? That you don't always agree on things. Were there strategies in place for mitigating potential conflict as you moved through this? And James, maybe I'll get you to start this one. Did you notice anything when you were going through the process that helped you with that?
Yeah, from a conflict standpoint during the transition, I think there's one thing that stood out to me that can be challenging, and that's transition of leadership, right? So you've got a group of individuals that have worked for Jim for 10 to 15 years, right? The trust and the loyalty that's built in that relationship is incredible. And it's a good thing, right? It powers our companies in ways like great culture. At the same time, the day comes in a transition where all of a sudden, right, I might change the vision a little bit and I need those folks to roll to me. And so I think it was a challenge, but I think my dad and I had great open communication, and I saw certain things like, hey, why is that individual talking to you about that strategy, right? That actually should be rolling up, through our standard process, or our weekly traction meeting, versus having a carve out during the middle of the week. And so Jim did a really great job. And I think, again, just having open communication to say, you know what, I'm going to forward that to James. And then it became a point where, if he had ideas, he would bring those to me, or we'd have a conversation with the client, and then he'd make it very clear, that's my input. At the end of the day, it's James's decision. So, and that takes a little while to make that transition, but to have that support from Jim to where he can give his input, but to vocalize and say, at the end of the day, it's his decision, it puts me in a position to lead better.
I think you hit on something really important there as well that maybe a lot of folks aren't there doing. We're, at Tigerpaw, we're a traction house as well, right? So when you have that kind of process in place for how things work and how they operate, it's really nice to, I think, be able to kind of default to the process, not the person, right? So in other words, hey, it's nothing personal, but the process says this has to go over to James. So I think that probably, really helps. I've had that in my own experience through the traction process. And, I guess it takes less of a personal edge off that, but there's still no getting used to it, right? Yeah. And when I first started with Tigerpaw, I was actually pretty good friends with James Foxfall at the get-go because we were partners for years. And so whenever I needed something at Tigerpaw, I would always go to James. And then when I actually started working for them, I learned that I was actually going to be reporting to our chief operating officer, Joel Vaslow. And much less, creative or loud and vivacious like James is, and much more operationally directed. And I was terrified at first, and it actually turned out to be the best move that the company could have made, right? But it took me as a person going through that transition, who I had to report to and speak to, there was a transition, right? So I love the way you handled that. And I wonder, Chelsey, if you could share with us for yourself, obviously with employees, customers have to be another one, right? For some of the larger customers, you probably do have some direct interaction. What kind of things did you have to manage conflict during that transition?
Sure. I think I'm in a lot of alignment with what James just said, because not the struggle, but just something that we had to make sure from the get-go that my dad and I did was get on the same page and have the same goal in mind. And that if we did have opposition, that we knew or had a little secret code word or something to take it offline, because we didn't want to have any of those deep conversations where we knew we were still discussing the same goal at hand with an audience or something that would break down our unity, because we do have a lot of complementary traits, I will say. He's got a ton of experience and I had the new ideas. And so that can become a bit of a challenge just to reinforce and make sure that you're constantly going after that same goal. When it came to the tools, we're a traction company too. And so that also helped take the personal aspect out, to your point, West. When it came to clients and it came to internal communication, that was, I think, the biggest thing that we tried to take advantage of, because when we set our sights on wanting to transition the company, struggle was my dad didn't know the timeline. He knew what and who, but he didn't know when. And so that was a bit of a tug of war game because, it's like I can keep playing this game, but usually I like to know, when we're there, when the game is like over.
The goalpost.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. And so I'm like, if you just want an office to get away from mom, we can totally work that out all day long. But and he was never in the way or anything. Huge compliment to our culture, still works with us. But I think that just the timeline aspect was a struggle. But the communication part is what we did take an opportunity to oversell that within, use it for recruiting. Lots of mergers and acquisitions are going down, and people are all of a sudden finding themselves working for people that they didn't know they were going to be working for 12 months ago. And so using that when we're recruiting new employees to say, this is our plan, this is the program, and it hasn't happened yet, and using it on our marketing materials with the sales team. It's, you've seen this partner or that partner become different in the last 2 and 3 years. Well, this is what our company has communicated to us and how we're structured and what our plans are for the future. And so I think that really helped the sales team and the recruitment process and really everyone just to understand and be transparent into what the roadmap looked like for our organization.
Well, that's great, and appreciate you sharing that. And I think that's really good advice for everyone else, out there to, to grab onto, right? And again, you've emphasized that communication piece, right? To be very clear on that. And now for the Woolfolk brothers, what kind of things did you guys have? And I got to think there was more potential for conflict in the transition, considering you were both actually, going to be taking over, right?
Yeah, and you've got grandma and grandpa, mom, dad, uncle, cousins, ourselves, and 2 siblings, right? Despite our own children and our wives, right? So kind of taking it back to the earlier days. And how do you navigate those, right? That's the big question. One really good piece of advice that we received was that you need 3 critical parties in the room. That's your attorney, preferably in family business, a family attorney that also represents the company in some aspect, that understands the business and understands the family's estate planning. The second is your insurance agent for not only your business insurance, but your family insurance. And then third was your accountant for not only your company, but also your personal taxes. And so often does one have an idea that bucks with the other 2, right? And those are some of those 3 critical components is how does your attorney help give you the ideas, your insurance agent and your accountant to bring that whole plan together. And preferably if they can all be in the room and understanding the wishes of all the parties involved, they can usually help you craft the best outcome if you let them go do it and then present it back to the group without forcing one individual or the other to try to pursue it from their perspective. And so that really assisted us a lot with so many parties at the table to be able to craft an ideal outcome for everybody. Because you were able to meet with them individually and share some of your own feedback from every party, and they could kind of put together the best plan that they thought was the best overall outcome, all while insulating the business and protecting the livelihood of your employees.
Yeah, and so it's interesting you added some elements there which were kind of external to what's going on internally, right? With the attorney, with the insurance, the actuaries, and with the accountants, right? That, those are so important. And I guess in a sense that they are working as an outside interest to try and craft something for those internally that have so much inside interest in that, right? Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, you can have the best plan in the world for what you think makes total sense to do all this, and then you go and try to execute on it, and your accountant says, hold on, did you figure out what this was going to do your tax situation when you do this and the taxable outcomes? Or what about, have you insured against this? What if one of you dies? What if one of you passes? What are you doing with key man insurance? Who's going to be running this? I mean, there's just so many elements to think about when you're running sizable organizations to make sure you're taking care of everybody, right? And you're not going to get it right. I mean, it's not going to be perfect, but
yeah.
Everybody, if you get set the stage day one, can everybody get to a 75% desirable outcome? That's a win, right? But you're going to leave 25% on the table for every party, right? And they need to understand that, not one person. If everybody walks around and, I've heard once, like a good mediation in a lawsuit, if both parties think that they weren't happy with the outcome, that means it was a good compromise, right?
Yeah.
If one party leaves thinking they won, that's a problem, right?
Yes. And especially when family's involved, right?
Yeah. Yeah, if everybody sits back and says, hey, we're okay with getting about 75% of my hopes for this outcome, I think that's a good win.
And listen, we did talk a little bit about communication through this already. I think it's impossible not to, with everything that you move through, just how critical communication is. And I wonder if there's just any additional thoughts that people have on communication, either with customers perhaps or others as you're moving through that, because I know that there is uncertainty, for customers when they see the reins being passed over as well, right? So any particular advice, for folks looking to move through succession with communication, thinking about their customers? And let's see, maybe Jim, I'll start with you.
A couple things. First of all, we, like Chelsey, we hired a consultant to help us through this, and this is relatively new, but James knew of a person with a great track record of assisting with this, and has involved the family and the leadership of our company to communicate with them, help us put some form around the thing, and I think it's been a big asset, to help with the communications.
Well, that's great.
We're flushing some things out early that we would probably have to deal with later too, which it's a lot of work, but is the right thing in the long run.
And what do they call that? Tabletopping almost, where you're kind of trying to get ahead of those scenarios, even if you don't encounter them. At least you're aware of what could happen when they do. Yeah. And Chelsey, how about you? Anything in particular for your customers that you were thinking of or did for your communication?
Kind of like I mentioned earlier, just in our sales presentations and for prospects or in just regular quarterly account reviews, it was all part of our story. We just continued to make it our story, make it our DNA. And it's kind of funny because whenever it actually did, close, I think it was October 1 of 2021. I had so many phone calls. They're like, oh my gosh, what now? What do your employees think? I'm like, business is normal. Like nobody was shocked. Like they've been waiting for the time, but nothing operationally really changed at all. In fact, it just got probably even smoother because we just over communicated it over the years. And I hat off to Jim because, as easy as that sounds, so many of my friends that are in these situations, not necessarily in our industry, seem to have parents that handle things a little differently. And it's more of I would say not a humble path to set your child up for success. It's more of a control, look how good I am and look what I've done. And I'm still at the reins and, your day will come. And it sets, James and myself and the Woolfolk brothers up for failure, because then it's hard for people to I think we all have to actually bring A game even more than someone that's not related, because people expect us just to have this handed off. And so you have to prove yourself and then some in these scenarios. And so if you don't have a parent that's helping communicate that, and it is a family transition, it becomes even that much more complicated to make it smooth. So
yeah, I think so. And that's when you run the risk of being, part of the 70% that don't make it, right? Because it's funny, there was a quote from George Lucas, after he sold to Walt Disney Company, right? And one of the interviewers said, wow, your kids are so rich now. And he smiled and laughed and said, no, I'm rich. Like, I don't have a thing, right? And that eventually comes. And it's so funny in a family situation that, yes, you do have to prove yourself. And I think the parents expect that, more as well, right? That it does come with that, with that added pressure. Yeah. And just how important communication is there. And, not sure, Hunter, Preston, anything to add there?
Nothing to add. We would prepare in the future as future preparation, going down to generations, we would communicate a whole lot more and do that over years. And as far as our customers go, I'm not sure most were aware anything was happening. They had the same account managers and people taking care of them.
Right. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
And we'll move on to the next. And sorry, did anyone else have something? Yeah, go ahead.
I would just add one thing there. I think, for a lot of our customers, they saw it as a really good thing. Depending on your market in the landscape of your competitors and what their ownership looks like, if they're getting great service from an organization, especially a family organization that's focused on the customer, and they know that, the fact that you're setting that company up for years to come to deliver that service in the same way, I think a lot of our customers see that as a great thing. Right? Great. I can continue to count on Loffler for another 30 years in the way I am right now, and getting in the great service and having the personal touch versus potentially, us being sold to maybe private equity where their experience could change. So, we heard a lot of great feedback from the clients that, they were really excited for us.
Yeah. And maybe there's, something also that, all companies, right, run the risk of becoming a bit stifled and stagnant. And when you have another generation coming in, and maybe that's how we'll lead into my next question, is that it can sort of facilitate some strategy changes and some new ideas, that maybe your customers have been looking for a long time, and we're just waiting for that next generation maybe to come in and be able to deliver on it, right? And so I wonder, Chelsey, you and I have actually talked about this in the past, but and you've mentioned obviously that you're really good at kind of the new ideas, right? So what kind of business strategy changes were involved in that succession planning, or did it all wait till afterwards, for some of those changes that you wanted?
Did I say I'm good at new ideas or bad ideas?
New ideas.
Ideas.
No, the bad ideas are over here. The new ideas are there.
Learning ideas, I think, is what we call them here. But so fortunately, I was lucky enough to have a dad that allowed some of the fresh ideas and experimental ideas to take place prior to that transition from happening. But the struggle that I found is sometimes it would hold me back a little bit in wanting to push myself and take some chances on things, knowing that I'm risking the last couple of years that he's wanting to gamble in business. And so, to the same tune, he's feeling pressure, holding me back, wanting to push me along as we diversify our offerings and such. And so, going back to some of the struggles, I think that was one thing that helped us with the light bulb. We really are after two different things. I still have time to reinvent some of those learning opportunities, and he needs to protect his investment and what he's worked his lifetime for. But so we got started diversifying in 2018. So got a couple years with his guidance and things that he was less knowledgeable and didn't care. And then it's allowed us to really take that and take more chances now that the pressure is off, having to hold his investment tight.
Yeah. And I think that's it. You did mention earlier that part's done now. So that's going to allow you some more, freedom for, like you said, some of those chances that you want to take. Right. And
Sure.
It sounds like it really is like what a tough struggle, because, for someone who has put in that initial investment all those years and everything else, to try and really protect that while not stifling innovation. Right. Well, thank you for that. And, for Hunter and Preston, any, thoughts there on, the strategy changes that you're looking for the next generation of this business?
Well, I think on a daily basis, part of my job is to stifle Hunter's innovation.
Operations, right?
Visionary too, Hunter.
It's every day I get a call on the way to work. So I have this idea. I'm like, how can we execute on that, right? So we're a really good team, right? We've got both sides of tactical and strategy, depending on what it is, for each one of us. I think that's going to be the hard part. I think the longer you stay in this role and the older we get, the harder part will be, don't rock the boat if it's not sinking, right? If things are working well and our customers expect that from us, but that's every day, right? So when it comes to innovation, when do you innovate and when do you execute on a tried and true method, right? And I'll liken it a little bit to what I view like remote work, right?
Yeah.
And so, a tried and true old school mentality is in person, face to face, right? And I'd say you saw a lot of popularity in the COVID era and post-COVID. Well, no, nobody ever needs to be in the office. Everybody needs to work from home. Who wants to bother with that, right? And everybody's going to have their own mixed opinion, but the only thing we're going to say is that in 2023, you're not seeing businesses reverse the decision to bring people back to office. You're seeing them reverse the decision to leave them at home. and separate them from your culture, right? And you're seeing massive companies with huge budgets, with huge divisions that decided to bring that element back into some form or fashion, right? But then there's elements like this where we're doing a live stream and none of us are in person and it's still operating well, right? So I think it's just a careful balance, right? It's where do you not break the secret sauce that has made you so successful, but where you bring those elements of innovation and new ideas, because we're going to get old, we're going to get tired, we're going to have less energy, and we're going to have these 20-year-olds flying around here saying, you should do this, and why don't you do it this way? And, part of that's inexperience, but part of it's creative new ideas just due to youth and age, right?
I'll also say that there were a bunch of great ideas that we thought we were absolute on. And every day we age, the dumber we get, right? I mean, we just figured out how much stuff we should have never gone after and went and undid it. So we learn every day along the way. And we're very, very thoughtful and considerate on making any new changes or any new ideas come into place.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that I'm not sure where I read the article, and you've probably all heard the same thing, that if you're looking at where you spend your money, 70% should be on kind of your existing business, because that's, where you're getting your bread and butter. 20% should be on sort of near future initiatives. So maybe it's cybersecurity or, looking at managed IT. And then, a very small percentage could go towards some of those skunk works or those, ideas that are kind of crazy, right? And maybe it's not just money, but maybe it's mindset as well, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's great. And listen, in respect for your time, you're getting, towards a part of the show where I just wonder if there's any lessons that you learned through the process that you all could share with those that are about to go through it that maybe weren't so obvious when you went into it. And Jim and James, maybe I'll start with you on this one.
Chelsey mentioned it before and Jim mentioned it as well, but I think having a coach that's gone through it before, that has experience navigating all that comes along with it, right? There's the tactical part, there's a client-facing part, there's the employee-facing part, there's the structure of the trust and how that's set up and how your family communicates. And there's a lot to it. And if you haven't been through it before, having an advisor that can pull those pieces together and help you think about things you haven't thought about and put them together in a way that maybe you haven't thought about it, I think is very helpful.
Okay.
I think the other thing for me, one of the lessons learned is you can never communicate enough, right? There were certain things that I brought in from a vision standpoint, right? We documented them in traction. And, in hindsight, I would have even spent more time with key leaders, making sure that they, were drinking the Kool-Aid that I was mixing up. And I think that could even accelerate our growth even more than it has. So those are the two things that I would mention.
Well, I appreciate that. And I know that everyone that's watching to learn how to do this does as well. And what about you, Chelsey? Anything else that maybe surprised you through the process that you would share with our viewers?
A lot surprised me through the process. I like the more you know, the scarier it gets. I will echo James. Yes, that the consultant, because they're looking at it really from the lens of, the one that's passing the torch and also the one that's gaining the fun. And so they can really ask the questions that make you think with a non-emotional approach to it. And then also kind of, I think Preston maybe touched on it earlier, there's so many different rabbit holes that you can go down that you really, each personal situation, if it's family, it looks a little different than if you're trying to do it without family. In terms of how the trust can benefit, or if you have siblings not in the business and things like that. The consulting really helped pull that communication in and not rip our family apart, even at day one, and allowing my siblings and even my mom to kind of be in on, this is what happens if we don't bring Chelsey on. She's probably not going to stick around. And then this is what your future could look like. And then if she sticks around. And so they felt like they were co-authoring the decision and things that would reward them down the road too. And so you hear scary stories about families, ripping themselves apart through stupid things like money, but it's a real thing. And so be cognizant of that as well.
Yeah, I love what you say there about this idea that whenever we're involved in the decision-making process, as I guess, as you would call it, key stakeholders. So they may not be successors, they may not be people that be involved in the business, but somehow feel that they have a stake in, either the history or the future of the business, right? And that once you feel like you're part of that solution, and it's interesting because that's really sales 101 as well, right? They were trying to convince the customer that it was entirely their decision, right? So I love it. That's great. Yeah. That's wonderful. And anything to add there, either Hunter or Preston?
I'll say no. I have a buddy right now going through a perpetuation with his father. And the biggest advice I can give him is the reason that your business is successful is because your father's really good at what he does. And the experience, I know you're the horse and I know you're really good at what you're doing and great ideas and you have all the energy and ambition, but know that you don't know what you don't know. And you learn that over time as you take those reins. And the embarrassment I'd have of the things that I thought I was absolute about just a few years ago. So it's a big learning curve. And I would definitely, for anybody who's going through the youngster and the perpetuation, honor those people who are in the lead because they know what they're doing. And it's a great win-win. You've got the experience and you've got the energy at both times and work together.
I love it. And hey, without the final word on that, Jim, as you're the only one on the call today that's actually handed down the reins, was there anything that surprised you, or any lessons you learned through the process?
I just think back to when I first started working and how hard it is to grow a business, and then you get to where you get older. And I never dreamed it would be so hard. It's hard to let it go.
Yeah.
It's hard, you're scrapping to put food on the table for many years of your life. And going through this transition where you're handing off what you built to others is a big job. And it takes a lot of planning, and to somebody's point with accountants and advisors, to try to do it in a way that doesn't strangle the next generation.
Yeah.
And then one other little comment I'd like to make that you had made about your parents, but also our key leaders in our company. We would be nothing without them. We've got some amazing people that have been with us for a long time that are part of the family. Seriously, and then all of our team members that have been with us a long time, and it's a big responsibility, to take care of them. But we're really grateful for all that they've brought to the table and continue to.
Well, I love it. And it looks like Michael Cousins kind of, did emphasize a little bit what you said there was, it's a lot less fun, obviously, when you're passing, the torch, right? And I think part of that is, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but, the things that we do become part of our identity as well, right? And especially when you do them for a very long time. So it really does feel like you're giving a piece of yourself, kind of away in the process. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it's not easy to let go.
Yeah.
And it takes time. Every passing day gets a little bit easier. And but the team's doing a great job. James is doing a great job. It's not without heartburn because you have a lot of people to deal with. But it's a great honor.
Well, and I love to hear that. And we're at the point now where I'm going to ask the impossible question. So if everyone is, please be prepared for the impossible question. It's, if you had one piece of advice, I'm sure you've got a lot more than one, but if you only had one piece of advice to give people that are thinking of embarking on this process for succession, what would that be? And Chelsey, I'll give you the first word.
It is the impossible me for the one piece of advice.
Yeah.
I would say, when you find that person that you think maybe has the potential to be that transition person or your next successor, put them in situations like I think my dad put me in, and I didn't appreciate it at the time, but he forced me to be the one finding an attorney whenever we were looking at the purchase of his partner back in 2011 and forced me into finding a new CPA when we were going a different route. And I didn't understand what I knew he was more than capable, but just being that comfort blanket well before I should have been tasked with all of those things in my mid-20s. And so I think that now that I look back, I'm pulling different leaders into different scenarios and trying to give them exposure and carry on the same modeling that he did for me, because it helped me not have to learn overnight. So that would be the one thing. Let people try to run while you're still around to guide them.
Yeah, that's great, because then you have the assistance, when you don't know you need it.
Yeah.
That's great. And how about you, Hunter, Preston? Do you have one piece of advice for folks looking to, embark on this journey?
Yeah, I think, James kind of hinted on this earlier, but share the plan early and often, especially with the family members. I think that's where probably most of the major problems come from, is that there's a lot of darkness. And if you're not sharing that plan and talking about it and make sure everybody's aware of what step of the plan you're in, people are going to put their own ideas in their own heads. So you might as well just plant the idea in their head, right? Like, small example I have, we're going to be moving our logistics operation here in 4 years to a new location. Every time I'm over there, I tell the guys, yeah, we're moving in 4 years. Like, so the day we move, I don't need you freaking out that we moved, Like, we're moving in 4 years. We're not staying in this place. Well, great.
I told you.
Yeah. Like, if you had a problem with it, you should have told me over the last 4 years, once a week, And so I think really, as families, especially with families, right, you're going to infer a lot of different things across all different generations unless you share the plan and share it often and make sure everybody knows where it's going.
Well, that's great. And what do they say? Space abhors a vacuum, right? So
Yeah.
If you don't fill it, other things will. That's great. And James, will get you to share. Is there one piece of advice from your experience being on the receiving end of Succession?
As business leaders, I think we do a pretty good job of being task-oriented individuals that are very efficient at checking things off the list. And my advice would be patient. And succession planning is a journey. It's what at first I looked at it as a task, something that needed to be completed. And the more I've looked at this, I've realized that it's a journey that is never going to end, right? We're going to go through a phase, and then we're going to look at our kids and go through another phase. And so just to make sure you go into it with the right expectation and with patience, because it's a journey with other people too, right? So just a perspective that changed as I went through the process.
I love it. And it's very thoughtful of the, thoughtfulness for the people involved. And Jim, you get the last word. So is there any advice that you would give,
Yeah, well, it would be similar, to like what James was talking about, and that's just to learn. There's lots of, and it differs for every person, every type of company, and I would say just start early in your process of learning the different ways of doing this, whether it be selling, ESOPs, family, whatever, and there's lots of different kinds of trusts that we're looking at right now, and there's a lot to know to do it right. So I would say just do your homework and start early.
I love it. And starting early is always good advice. And listen, I want to thank you for all the advice that you've shared with our viewers today on succession planning. And I do want to share, I'm just going to bring up my screen here. Maybe, let's see if I can do it. I knew I could do it. If you want to learn, for more educational resources and content, you can absolutely pop over to tigerpaw.com, and you can learn. At the top there, you will see a note for the Tigerpaw and Rev.io company acquisition. So if you want to get the press release, you can visit our website and get it there. And of course, visit our resources pages for lots of other educational, content that is there as well. Speaking of educational content, just in time, we have a new ebook, The Ultimate Guide to Succession Planning for Technology Services Businesses. This is something that we worked long and hard at, and you can actually come on this page here and request a copy of your own. And you can also visit those that joined us today. So for documentation, you can visit mation.com. That's mation.com. And if you want to get over to Loffler, that's loffler.com to visit them as well and see what they're all about. And of course, Pearson-Kelly, so that you can get over to see what they're doing in the technology, arena as well. And I really cannot thank you all enough for joining in today and how busy you are, obviously running those companies, and to be able to share this with other folks in the industry is absolutely a generous act. So cannot thank you enough. Thanks for joining in today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. And of course, thank you to our audience, for everyone that's tuned in, that will be watching this on YouTube. Thank you for your time, for keeping a keen eye on education and learning to better your business so you can sleep better at night. And until next time, I'm Wes McDonald. Thank you very much, everybody.